Hello, this is Lucy O'Hagan from Wild Awake, and I'm here today to wish you Bealtaine blessings. So I thought I would make a video combining two of the most powerful symbols of Bealtaine. So that of the hawthorn above me, so just starting to come into bloom now, and why we know it as the May blossom or the May tree, and also fire. So at this weekend there would have been the Festival of Fires up on Ishnock in Westmeath, and there's a bonfire that was traditionally lit on the hill and still is now that this festival has been revived. It's lit on the hill of Ishnock, which is considered to be the spiritual centre of Ireland, and from there bonfires would have been lit on different parts, on different hills around the area and across Ireland. So yeah, I just want to really combine these really powerful symbols of fertility, of life, of passion, of sexuality, and make this video for you today. So I'm going to teach you a very ancient method of fire lighting for a very ancient festival, and that is fire by friction. So I would have been teaching this class today anyway, at my Rewild in the City program, and obviously I'm not. So yeah, today I'm going to show you how to make a bow drill kit and how to use it in a very condensed way. So yeah, we'll see how we go. So first of all, we need to consider, when we're making fire by friction, what woods are useful to do that. So over the years I've kind of picked out my favourites and stuck with those, but essentially there are 1, 2, 3, 4, like 5 components to a bow drill set. So we have our board. So the bow drill board, these ones have been used to death and this one is just new. So both the board, also known as the hearth board, and the spindle are to be made from dead wood, but not so dead that the wood has started to become punky or rotten. They're kind of like freshly dead. One test that we can do is if we dig our fingernail into the wood and it still leaves a mark, that it's a good sign that it's in good quality wood to use. So for the hearth board, I really recommend using soft woods. So the wood that I love to use is lime or linden tree, which is a tree that I introduced you to in a video before. Or willow, ivy, elder. Yeah, some people like to use also like sycamore or birch or hazel, and then we're starting to get into harder woods here. So I find hazel really hard. Some people love it. I also think that it has as much to do with the quality of the wood and the stage of decay that it is at. Sometimes you can pick a piece of willow and it's really hard, and a piece of hazel might be much easier to use. So it's one of those things that like you really get to know in your bones as you develop the skill more. But I think lime or linden is a great place to start, and it's certainly my favourite. I love the smell that it gives off when I create fire as well. It's obviously a very multi-sensory experience. And then as regards to the spindle, some people say the spindle and the hearthboard need to be the same wood. I totally disagree, and I love to use hazel because your spindle needs to be straight, and it needs to be round. So hazel already grows that way, you know, it sends up these suckers of growth, and you can really take advantage of that. Whereas if you were to get a bigger piece of wood, I mean, it's great to hone your carving skills, isn't it, to create like a really cylindrical piece of wood, but nature's already done the work for me here in this case. So yeah, my favorite combinations for the bow drill is hazel spindle and lime or linden hearthboard. So those two pieces are dead wood, and then we have our bearing block. So the bearing block is made from, in the beginning, a piece of green wood. This is obviously seasoned now, But what we want to make sure is that there is going to be, and this will become clear as we use the kit, but there's less friction happening here. I'm just going to talk about that in a little while, but yeah, essentially to start with a green piece of wood for your bearing block is a great idea. Or I also use a deer bone astragalus, so this is from the knee of a deer. But if you don't have one of those knocking around, then you can just use a piece of wood. Or you could use a stone as well, like a soft stone. And some people have like their knives adapted to have like bearing block pieces on the knife as well. Or some people use as fidget spinners as well. Yeah, there's lots of things you could use. I love to use this. And then finally we have the bow. So this is what is going to make your life a lot easier when you're creating fire by friction, because you know we've got the hand drill method, and I'm really trying hard with that at the moment, but my hands are being ripped to pieces with it. It's a really difficult thing to do, and that is by rubbing a stick into the hearth board, just using your palms and the force of your body. But essentially the bow is what turns this into more of a machine that's doing more of the work for you. Doesn't always feel like that when you're doing it, but it's taking away a lot of the work. So the bow needs to be cut green. I'm saying green, but I mean fresh. So we cut the branch of a tree that has a natural bow in it, and you can pick pieces that have like little branches, and that will hold your string in place as well, or you can carve a notch into the bow. The length of the bow is important, so we generally measure from the sternum out to the fingertips, and this is a great length, which means that you're going to get as many rotations in one stroke as possible. If you have a tiny bow, you're just going like, it takes a long time. So yeah, we have the bow, the hearth board, the spindle, and the bearing block. We will need another little piece of equipment called an ember pan, so that's just to collect the dust that's going to be your ember. So I use sometimes bits of wood, bits of bark. Yeah, it's important not to use bark, like birch bark will curl up around your ember if you're not careful. Sometimes I've used leaves as well. So there's lots of things that you can get creative with in using. So yeah, we're going to go through how to make this kit. So I have got a piece of birch wood already prepared. I'm going to get something to hit it with. So in beginning, I want a straightish, it's okay, round piece of wood. And we're going to hammer chop it. So we're going to chop down through the wood to create a flat board. And it's good actually if you have your spindle already prepared, because you don't want your spindle to be thicker than the board itself. I mean, this is kind of on the edge, but essentially you don't want your spindle to go right through the board until you've made an ember. So you give yourself as much chance as possible. So maybe I'll start with carving the spindle then. So I'm going to assume that if you're watching this and you want to make a bow drill kit, that you are comfortable using a knife, but I will say a few things about that. So protecting the main arteries in our body, particularly when we're using a knife, we're thinking about our femoral artery between our legs. We also have another major artery on our arms and on our neck. You have to be doing really well to get those, but never say never. But definitely always being aware of this triangle between your legs, and also like the distance of people around you. I don't know how close people are going to be to you at this moment with the 2 meter, but yeah, that's important to keep ourselves safe and other people safe when we're using a knife, because you know it's an amazing tool, but can also be quite dangerous. So when we're carving the spindle, we're going to have a bottom, which is going to be the piece that bores into the board, and the top, which is going to be where the bearing block sits. So we want to maximize the amount of friction, and so causing heat on the board, and minimize the amount of friction in the bearing block. So the way to do that is to carve. I've already carved this, but I'm going to carve it a little bit more so you see. We're going to carve this, we're going to say this is the bottom, this bottom part of the spindle into like a kind of shallow triangle shape. If you imagine maybe like the top of a yurt or something like that. We don't want it to be too steep, because if it's too steep, it will just bore right through the board without actually getting a chance to build up enough friction on the whole round of the piece of wood. It's so weird doing videos because I would be stopping at this point to say, like, does this make sense? Do you have any questions? But we'll keep going. So I'm going to carve this. I'm going to use a push cut. So I'm holding the wood with my hand, and my thumb that is free will push the back of the handle of the blade. And we want to create a point on the tip. So you'll go through this motion until you get that kind of shallow cone shape. Okay, and then the top of it. So what I quite often see in when people are learning bow drill is they have like this, and the other side pretty much exactly the same, or like a really, where did that wee one go? Yeah, or like a really small tip. But if we think about it, when we're doing the bow drill, we're pushing down with this hand, and as we push down, and this is spinning, we're going to wear away at this point of the spindle. And if we wear away to it where it gets to the point that we're just kind of pushing the piece of wood, like all of it, it's going to be much harder to push than say this little shallow piece. So the longer this piece kind of like radiates up, the more time I'm going to have until it reaches like the full thickness of the wood. So this is kind of like a movement in, like a scooping movement to get that nice long top on the spindle. And this is already fire hardened at the top, but again, you don't want it to come to a complete point. It's more like a scoop in and then a little hat. I suppose that's like some kind of screwdriver shape. I'll show you it so you have a better idea. Okay, so you can see there. Okay, so this is our spindle. So I'm going to set that away. Maybe I would just say that if there's anything like sticking out of your spindle, say if you had like a little bump on it or a little branch or something that could interfere with your rope that's going to be spinning the spindle, just to carve that away so that it's nice and smooth. You don't need to take off all of the bark, but just in case there was any kind of feature that was going to interfere with the friction. Okay, so then we're going to take our piece of wood and we're going to hammer chop this. So putting the piece of the work furthest away from you on the stump, and we're just going to use another piece of wood just to knock off. So if you want to come in and see that. So I'm just taking off the edge here and an edge here and leaving the middle as our hearth board. I'm spinning it around. So just notice when I'm bashing this in, I'm hitting the back of the knife over where it goes into the wood. And then as it's buried into the wood, I start to hit the tip, always pushing down with this hand as well. Okay, that should do. And you can take a moment, if it's not totally straight, just to level it out. Always resheath your knife and put it somewhere safe. Okay, so now we have a hearth board and a spindle. So I'm going to do this on the grass, but I want to pick a way that this board is going to sit nice and solidly for me. So taking a moment just to see where the curve is and where the best place for my spindle to sit might be, and it feels like there would be a good spot. I'm just going to take a little bit more off that other side. Sure, let's give it a go. Okay, so when thinking about where to drill the hole in, we want to make sure that the drill isn't sitting off the edge of the board, and that will become clear afterwards. So we need to pick a point for the drill to drill into, essentially. So we're going to lay the spindle down so that the edge of the spindle lines up with the edge of the board, and then just stand it up. And then take your knife and make a mark where the point of that spindle sits in. And you want to make a mark big enough so that when you stand the spindle up, the point can't really move. So that's quite solid. Okay. Now we're going to start to use our bow, and we're going to do that to bore our first hole in. So I'm going to imagine that we've just done that. This is what I made earlier, because I'm going to show you how to use the whole thing in a moment. So we have used our spindle to bore in this hole. So it's gone right through there. So now we want to cut out a little notch, like here. And when the spindle spins in the hole, it starts to create heat and it starts to bore away at the wood. So this is kind of why quite often we want the spindle to be just a little bit harder than the actual board. And as this drills in, if you're getting the right amount of speed and the right amount of pressure, you should create a black dust. And that black dust drops down into this little chamber. And the dust builds up and up and up. And because this chamber is the size that it is, there is enough space that an ember can build. Not too much space that the dust just kind of falls away and doesn't have enough tightness to create that much heat to produce an ember. And not too small either, that a lot of the dust gets caught around the outside. So there is a kind of maths to this, and that is we want to divide this hole up. So we're going to start by marking north to south, west to east, then putting in our other directions. Okay, so we have all the points of the compass, and we're going to take between southwest and southeast. We're going to put a mark between those two. So this is essentially like a 16th. So we're taking out 2 16ths from there to create 1/8 here. So we want to push that down. Okay, so now we're going to carve out this triangle right until the center of the hole. So maybe we'll pause that while I do that. Can you do that? Okay, we're back. Magic of technology. So I've used the knife to carve out this notch. And one thing that I meant to say was that if you use this spindle to drill in your hole, this is the spindle that you will use with this hole the whole time. You can't come along with a different spindle and expect it to work in the same hole, essentially. So carve a good one. So I'm gonna go on to how to use the bow drill now. So I'm gonna take my spindle, my bearing block, a little piece of wood to use, no, my bearing block, this is the hearth board. I'm gonna use my deer bone as the bearing block and a little ember pan. And I'm gonna move this. And before you start making fire by friction, it's always good to have your tinder nest ready. It's nothing worse than getting an ember and then frantically searching for the tinder to turn it into a flame. Believe me. So, right, so ember pan on the ground. And the hearth board goes on top of the pan with the ember board just below the notch. And I also just wanted to say on this one that you can kind of see that this is a little bit punky, as in the wood is kind of peeling away, so it's a bit like more rotten than I would like, but we'll work with what we've got today in the interests of authenticity, transparency. So we get to one of the hardest parts of bow drill for some people, which is getting the spindle onto the bow. So the way that I have been taught and that works for me is I'll start kneeling and I'll lean the bow against my body, which leaves both hands free. We're going to take our spindle, it goes into the string and out, and we have one hand on either side of the string. And then you're going to hold both parts of the spindle and twist it in like that. So we want it to be nice and tight. Okay, if you need to see that again, you can rewind and look at it again. Yeah, I'll just twist it out. Okay. Now we're going to pick up our bow and place the base of the spindle on the hearth board and bring your foot so that the bridge of your foot is on top of the hearth board, and that the edge of your foot is like not touching the spindle but right beside it. I'm kind of in like almost a lunge position, so my knee is nice and straight here. My heel is lined up with my knee behind me. This is a lot of camera work for you today. So this is a position that works really well for me, and I'll explain why. So we're going to bring this hand in front of the knee and put the bearing block on top of the spindle. Okay. When I do it like this, I have this part of my hand resting against this part of my leg. I'm like devoid of body part words at the moment. Shin, that's your shin, right? Okay, so the inside of my wrist is resting against my shin. There we go. So this is important because it's going to give you extra support. Sometimes I see people doing it over here and you have nothing to support your hand. So you get this wobble. And wobble means that you're not putting as much downward pressure. You're focusing more on keeping it straight. So you're wasting a lot of energy when you're doing this. And when you're doing this, you really don't want to waste energy because it takes a lot. So getting that foot, that shin really close into the spindle and just really feeling the support of your arm against your leg. So the next thing to think about is how to hold the bow. So we want the bow to be parallel to the ground, and as we move back and forward, your elbow is not bending. So that's another thing that I see is people going like this, and the string starts to ride up or move up the spindle, and then it flies off, and then you're back to trying to get the spindle onto the bow. Anyway, you'll go through all of that because it's hard, you know, it's not an easy thing to do, but it is possible. So we're gonna be pushing down as hard as we can with this hand and going backwards and forwards. And I'm gonna go through this, and hopefully you'll see that when I start to see smoke coming from the hole, I'm gonna increase the pressure. So don't use it all at once. I wanna increase the pressure and bow faster. Okay, you ready? Okay, so I'm going to stop because something's happening that I know that I can change. So that is, okay, if you come in really close, this is really good troubleshooting. So you see the dust is a really light brown. So it's not that dark, like the black dust that we're looking for. And I could feel as I was doing this that the string on my bow was slipping. So I'm just gonna tighten the bowstring. So I'm just doing a tensioning knot here, which will keep the tension in the string. So this is just paracord that I'm using. Like I have used deer skin in the past, or like any kind of animal skin, which works really well. But like for using plant fibers, you really want to make sure that you're going to get like an ember really quickly, because they tend to break very quickly. So quite often we'll keep the dust, but I'm just going to swipe this off. And if you notice, there was a lot of dust forming around the outside, around the edge. So I'm just going to use my knife to widen this hole a little bit. Okay. Let's try again. That's really tight now. Okay, back up. And yeah, so if you are not using a deer's knee bone and you're using a piece of wood, you want to like lubricate this hole in some way. It's the sexuality of Bealtaine coming through. So you want to put something in here that's going to lubricate that. So whether it's spit or like a leaf or a piece of grass or a piece of moss, we just want as little friction as possible on the top, like on the bearing block, so that all the friction is concentrated onto the hearthboard. It's not as important if you have a bone or something, because it's so again, it's still not as black as I would like the dust to be, and I think that's to do with how punky the wood is. But we just give it a little time to build up, and if it was wet, you'd want to get this off the ground as quickly as possible. Take a deep breath. I always like to take a moment just to like welcome this new flame into the world, this new little ember. And then very gently You're going to take it and making sure not to let it fall apart. We've got your little ember. We're going to slide you in to your wee nest. And we're going to blow some life into you. So tuck it in. There we are. Happy Bealtaine, everybody. Let's welcome our fires for the year ahead. Slán.